He called me a loser while drinking wine I paid for. My daughter laughed. They thought the old cop was finished. But they forgot one thing. A detective never stops investigating. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Because this night, this celebration, was the beginning of the end. It was the night the blindfold finally came off. And I saw the truth. The smell of expensive steak filled the air. Thick, rich, and cooked by people I didn't hire. Laughter echoed off the walls of the upscale restaurant. It was loud, abrasive. We were supposed to be celebrating, or rather my son-in-law David was celebrating. I was just the guy picking up the check. The atmosphere was heavy with success. Their success. I sat at the long table, feeling out of place. My suit felt tight. I'm Robert. For 35 years I wore a badge. Homicide detective. I dealt with facts, evidence, the cold, hard reality of what people do to each other. This world, flashy watches, slick suits, endless boasting. It felt foreign. It felt deeply wrong. And I had a nagging feeling that something dark was hiding beneath the surface. Tonight was about David's latest triumph. He sold high-end real estate, always closing a massive deal, always on the verge of a huge commission. He spoke in a language I didn't understand. Leverage, market dominance, closing deals. It always sounded too good to be true. I should have listened to my gut. It was screaming at me. My daughter Emily sat beside him, beaming. She was blinded by his charisma, by the lifestyle he provided. A lifestyle that I increasingly was funding. It hurt to see her so captivated by a man who seemed hollow inside. A man with eyes that never smiled. It started 2 years ago. Innocently enough, David needed a bridge loan. Just a small amount to secure a property. He promised a quick return, a significant profit. I wanted Emily to be happy, to be secure. I was retired, living comfortably on my pension and savings. My late wife, Sarah, had left us secure, so I gave him the money. That was my first mistake, and it wouldn't be my last. The returns came, just as promised. Impressive. So when he asked for a larger investment for his next big project, a waterfront development that promised to change the city skyline, I agreed. And then again, and again, and again. I thought I was investing in their future. I didn't realize I was just buying a ticket to my own humiliation. I was the mark. Real estate in this city is a battlefield, Robert, David was saying. He swirled the expensive wine in his glass. I knew that bottle alone cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and I knew it would end up on my bill. He was talking to me, but playing to the audience, his colleagues, his clients, all cut from the same slick, greedy cloth. They were sharks, and I was swimming in their tank. You have to be ruthless, he continued. He flashed a predatory smile, the kind I used to see in the interrogation room, on the faces of men who had done terrible things. You have to see the angles, exploit the weaknesses. Hesitation is for the weak. He was enjoying this, enjoying the power he thought he had over me. He thought I was weak. He was wrong. He glanced at me. A condescending smirk played on his lips, and then he went for the attack. He couldn't resist. The table quieted slightly. The clinking of silverware slowed. David leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine, a snake preparing to strike. He knew exactly what he was about to say. The anticipation hung heavy in the air. I suppose police work was different, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Predictable, black and white, following orders, safe, just waiting for the pension to kick in. I felt a familiar tightening in my jaw, my hand clenched under the table. Predictable. 35 years of staring into the abyss, of piecing together shattered lives, of fighting for justice in a world that rarely offered any. The word stung. It was meant to. The world has changed, Robert. David continued, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. His voice boomed with arrogance. The old ways, the pensions, the slow grind. It's obsolete. It's all about speed now. Aggressive growth. Taking risks. He sounded like a cheap salesman, peddling dreams to the desperate, but everyone else was nodding, hooked on his promises. He leaned back in his chair, radiating smug satisfaction, the king of his castle. This latest deal, the waterfront development, it's going to change the skyline of this city, and it's going to make us all very, very rich. He raised his glass, a toast to his genius. Everyone cheered, except me. I just watched. I observed. I analyzed. Emily squeezed his arm. Her eyes shone with admiration. It was a punch to the gut, a sharp physical pain. She used to look at me that way, when I taught her how to ride a bike, when I showed her how to stand up for herself. Now she only had eyes for him, and she was blind to his cruelty, blind to the man behind the mask. The dinner dragged on, an eternity of self-congratulation. David dominated the conversation. His brilliance, his foresight, his inevitable success. I watched him. This man who had never risked anything real, who only manipulated numbers and perceptions, who built his empire on sand. I felt a profound weariness, a deep aching sadness for Emily, for myself, for the world we lived in. It was later in the evening. Dessert had been served, expensive little cakes that tasted like ash in my mouth. David was flushed with wine and self-importance. He was telling a story about a competitor he supposedly crushed, a story meant to intimidate, to impress. The guy was a dinosaur, David gloated, gesturing wildly with his wine glass. He played it safe. He hesitated. In this world, Robert, you either take what you want or you get trampled. He was setting me up. I could feel the final blow coming. The coup de grace. He turned his attention to me, his eyes glittering with malice. The conversation had turned, as it always did, to my perceived lack of ambition, my small life. Seriously, Robert, he said, the laughter bubbling up in his throat. You spent your whole life on the street, dealing with lowlifes, chasing shadows. You retired with a decent pension, sure, but you never really built anything. You never took any real risks. You just existed. He was trying to break me, in front of everyone, in front of my daughter. He chuckled. A cruel, condescending sound that scraped against my skin. And then came the moment. The moment everything changed. The moment the old Robert died, and the detective was reborn. He leaned forward, the grin spreading across his face, a grotesque mask of triumph. The whole table went silent. Dead silent. They were anticipating the punchline, the final humiliation. I have to ask. Honestly, he said, his voice loud and clear. How does it feel to be a loser? The room erupted in laughter. Harsh, barking sounds, like a pack of hyenas tearing apart their prey. It scraped against my skin, and then I saw her. Emily, my own daughter. She was laughing. Her hand flew to cover her mouth, her eyes darting nervously towards me. But she was still laughing. They were laughing at me, the man who signed the checks, the man who funded the very success they were celebrating, the man who loved her more than anything in the world. The betrayal was complete. The knife was twisted deep in my gut. I didn't laugh. I didn't flinch. A strange calm settled over me, the kind of calm that used to descend during an interrogation, when the suspect was cornered, when I knew I had them, when I knew I was about to flip the script. The game had changed, and they didn't even know it. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was cold, hard, the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose. I don't know, David, I said quietly. My voice, though soft, cut through the dying laughter like a razor blade. Everyone stopped. They looked at me, confused, surprised. They saw the change in my eyes, the steel behind the sadness. I leaned forward, meeting his arrogant gaze with a steady one of my own. The detective's stare, the one that had broken murderers. But let me ask you something, I continued. My voice was low, even deadly. How does it feel to know that this loser will no longer pay your bills? The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. You could hear a pin drop. David's face, ruddy and flushed seconds before, turned completely pale, ashen. The glass in his hand trembled. The wine swirled violently. He knew I meant it. He knew the game was over. Emily looked horrified, her eyes wide with shock. Dad, she whispered, her voice strained. What are you doing? She reached out to me, a desperate plea in her eyes. But I ignored her. My focus was on David, the suspect, the target. David tried to recover. He attempted a laugh. It came out as a choked gasp, a pathetic sound. That's a good one, Robert. Good joke. Very funny. He was sweating now. The mask was slipping. The fear was visible. I'm not joking, I said. Still low, still calm, still deadly. The bank of Robert is officially closed. Effective immediately. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I stood up. I felt taller than I had in years. Enjoy the rest of your evening. The bill, as usual, is on me. It's the last one. I walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I left the stunned silence behind me. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt a familiar dread, the kind of dread I used to feel at the beginning of a complicated case. When you find the first body, the investigation had just begun. And I already knew it was going to be ugly. I drove home to my quiet, empty house. The house I shared with my late wife, Sarah. She was my anchor, my moral compass. She would have seen through David in a heartbeat. She always knew how to spot a liar. She always protected our family. Now it was my turn. I sat in my study, surrounded by commendations, plaques, photos of Sarah. I looked at her smiling face, her warm eyes. I messed up, Sarah, I whispered into the silence. I let him fool me. I let him hurt our girl. The guilt was heavy, a crushing weight on my chest. I had failed her. I had failed Emily. The word loser echoed in my ears. It wasn't just an insult, it was a dismissal of my entire life. Everything Sarah and I had built together, the sacrifices we made, the justice we fought for. He had spit on all of it, and Emily had laughed. The memory burned like acid. I had ignored my instincts, the instincts that kept me alive on the streets for 35 years. I had ignored the red flags, the constant need for cash, the vague explanations, the lavish spending, the way David always seemed to be sweating, even in the winter. I had let my love for Emily blind me to the truth. I wanted her fairy tale to be real. I was a fool, an old sentimental fool, but the insult tonight had stripped away the illusion. The blinders were off. The fog cleared. I wasn't just a retired cop anymore. I wasn't just a grieving husband. I was a detective with a new case, and the prime suspect was my own son-in-law. It was time to go back to work. It was time for justice. The next morning I made a call, the most important call of my life. I called Frank, my old partner. We worked homicide together for 20 years. He was retired too, but Frank never really clocked out. He still had contacts, still had the skills, still had the dents. Frank was the only person I could trust, the only person who understood. We met at a small diner downtown, the kind of place we used to frequent when we were on duty. Greasy food, bitter coffee, and the comforting anonymity of the crowd. Frank was already there, sitting in our usual booth in the back. He hadn't changed. Still looked like a bulldog. Still had that skeptical look in his eye. "You look like hell, Robert," Frank said as I sat down. No pleasantries, just the facts. He pushed a cup of coffee towards me. "I feel like it." I told him everything. The investments, the disrespect, the dinner, the look on Emily's face when she laughed, the betrayal. Frank listened silently, his expression grim. He stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic mug. "I never liked that guy," he finally said. "Too slick, too greedy, smelled like a con man from day one." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp. "And you've been funding him. How much, Rob?" I told him the amount. Frank whistled low. "Jesus, Rob, that's almost everything you had." "I know. I was a fool. I wanted Emily to be happy. I thought I was helping." I rubbed my eyes. I felt exhausted and deeply ashamed. "Happiness built on a lie is not happiness, Robert," Frank said softly. "It's a hostage situation, and you just cut the ransom supply." He was right. Emily was a hostage, and I had helped build her prison. "I need your help, Frank," I said, leaning forward. "I need to know where my money is going. I need to know if this real estate empire is even real. I need to know how deep the rabbit hole goes. I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it was." Frank nodded slowly. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for payment. He just nodded. "We'll open him up. We'll follow the money." It always leads to the truth. We'll turn over every rock and see what crawls out. He paused. But be prepared, Robert. It's going to get ugly. And it might cost you more than just money. He was talking about Emily. I knew that. And I was terrified. We started the investigation immediately. Old school police work. Public records. The properties David claimed to own. The development projects he boasted about. The paper trail. We worked out of Frank's basement, surrounded by old case files and the smell of stale cigarettes. It felt like old times, but the stakes were much higher now. This time, it was personal. The reality was staggering. It was worse than I thought. Much worse. It was a house of cards, built on sand. Most of the properties were heavily mortgaged, leveraged to the hilt. He didn't own them. The banks did, and he was behind on the payments. He was juggling debt like a circus clown. But the real shock came when we looked into the waterfront development. The project that was going to change the city skyline? It was a ghost town, stalled, buried in debt, and legal disputes. Lanes filed by contractors who hadn't been paid. There were no permits. No construction. Just an empty lot, a rusty fence, and a glossy brochure full of lies. He had sold a dream, a very expensive dream, and I had bought it. And the returns I had been receiving, the profits that made me believe in him, the proof that my investments were sound, they weren't profits. They were just small portions of my own money, recycled back to me. To maintain the illusion of success, to keep me hooked. It was a classic con. Textbook. It was a Ponzi scheme. A house of cards built on deceit. A manipulation. David was using new investments, my investments, to pay off earlier investors, while skimming off the top to fund his lavish lifestyle. The expensive suits, the Rolex watches, the extravagant dinners I paid for, all paid for with stolen money. My money, my life savings. I wasn't an investor. I was a victim. While Frank dug deeper into the finances, I focused on David. The man himself, the suspect. I started surveillance. Old habits die hard. I still had my unmarked car, still knew how to blend into the background, to become invisible. I watched him. I followed him. I observed his routine. The expensive lunches at high-end restaurants. The visits to the tailor, getting fitted for new suits. The late-night meetings at dimly lit bars. He was still playing the part. The successful businessman. But I could see the cracks now. The sweat on his brow, the forced smile, the frantic phone calls, the desperation in his eyes. He was drowning, and he was looking for a lifeline. One afternoon, I followed him to a jewelry store. A very expensive one. An exclusive boutique downtown. I watched through the window as he leaned over the counter. The salesman brought out a black velvet tray, diamonds, a necklace, a stunning piece, thousands of dollars. I felt a surge of rage. Hot, blinding fury. My money, funding his extravagance. While I was sitting at home eating leftovers, worrying about my future, I wanted to confront him right there, to expose him in front of the salespeople, to smash the glass case and take back what was mine, to grab him by the throat. But the detective in me held back. Patience, evidence, an airtight case. I couldn't jeopardize the investigation for a moment of satisfaction. I needed to know who the necklace was for. I assumed it was for Emily, a peace offering, a way to smooth things over, after the dinner incident. I was wrong, dead wrong. That night, I followed him to a trendy apartment building downtown, a luxury loft building. He parked his expensive car in the loading zone, looked around nervously, and went inside. I ran the name on the mailbox. Maria Sanchez, a hostess at one of the bars David frequented. A beautiful young woman with expensive taste. I waited. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, he emerged, with Maria. She was wearing the diamond necklace. They kissed, long and deep. He held her close, whispering something in her ear. I felt a cold realization wash over me. This wasn't just about money. This was about betrayal on a whole different level. He was cheating on Emily with my money. I took photos, grainy, but clear enough, evidence, proof. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. He was destroying my daughter's life, and I was paying for it. The pressure from Emily started mounting. The fallout from the dinner had been swift and brutal. The money tap was turned off. David was furious, and he was taking it out on her. He was manipulating her, turning her against me. She showed up at my house one afternoon, unannounced, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked exhausted, broken. My heart ached for her, but I knew I had to be strong, for both of us. "Dad, you have to apologize," she pleaded, sitting on my sofa. The same sofa where Sarah used to sit. "David is incredibly stressed. His business is under pressure. You pulled your funding at a critical moment. You're jeopardizing everything. You're making our lives impossible." She sounded like a recording, David's words coming out of her mouth. "I'm jeopardizing everything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "By refusing to fund a lie, by refusing to be disrespected, by refusing to be scammed." "It's not a lie," she cried, her voice rising in desperation. "It's complicated. Real estate is complicated. He just needed more time. The market is volatile. You don't understand the pressure he's under. You're being so cruel." "Cruel?" She called me cruel. "Emily, honey, I need you to listen to me," I said softly. "David is not who you think he is. His business is failing. He's deeply in debt. He's using you." I wanted to tell her everything. The Ponzi scheme. The affair. But I couldn't. Not yet. It would break her. It would put her in danger. She refused to believe me. She was in denial, clinging to the illusion of the perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect future. She couldn't face the truth, because if David was a fraud, then her life was a lie. And then she said something that shattered me. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. She looked so much like Sarah when she was angry. The same fiery eyes, the same stubborn jaw, the same fierce loyalty. But this time, her loyalty was misplaced. "You're just jealous," she accused, her voice sharp, cutting, hysterical. "You're jealous of David's success, of the life we built. You always resented him because he wasn't the noble public servant you wanted me to marry. You want him to fail." The accusation stung. It hit a nerve, a hidden insecurity I harbored about my own modest life. My pension, my quiet retirement. Was I jealous? Was I projecting my own failures onto him? The doubt gnawed at me, a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. But then I remembered the facts, the evidence, the empty lot, the recycled money, the diamond necklace on Maria Sanchez's neck. This wasn't about me. It was about protecting her from the inevitable collapse of David's house of cards. "This isn't about jealousy, Emily," I said softly, my voice heavy with sadness. "It's about the truth, and I won't let you live a lie. I won't let him destroy you, even if you hate me for it." She left angry and hurt. She slammed the door on her way out. The sound echoed through the empty house. I watched her go, my heart aching with a pain so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. My daughter, my little girl, was lost to me. I had failed her, as a father, as a protector. I was alone. Frank and I decided to look into the other investors, the people David was scamming. We needed more leverage, more evidence. We found Mrs. Petrov, an elderly woman living in a small rent-controlled apartment. She had invested her life savings with David, everything she had. "Mr. David is such a nice young man," she said, her hands trembling as she poured us tea. Her apartment smelled of lavender and old memories. "He promised me I would double my money. I wanted to leave something for my grandchildren, to help them with college." My heart broke for her. She was a victim, just like me, just like Emily. David didn't just steal money. He stole dreams. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat so far, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe. It helps our channel grow and bring more stories like this to light, because the investigation was about to take a much darker turn. A turn that erased all doubt. A few days later, Frank called me, his voice low and urgent. The tone I recognized from countless late-night calls about a fresh crime scene. The tone that meant things were about to get very bad. "Robert, we have a problem." This isn't just about money anymore. David isn't just running a Ponzi scheme. He's involved with some very dangerous people. People you don't mess with. We met at his house. He laid out the evidence on his kitchen table. Financial records, surveillance photos, names, faces. Names I recognized from my years on the force. The picture he painted was terrifying. The realization that changed everything. It was worse than I thought. Much worse. David hadn't just borrowed from banks. He had borrowed money. A lot of money from a notorious loan shark. Vince, the Viper, Gallo. A man known for his brutal enforcement methods. Broken bones. Hospital visits. Disappearances. People who crossed Gallo didn't just lose their money. They lost their lives. David had used the waterfront property as collateral. The same property he had sold to multiple investors, including me, including Mrs. Petrov. He had leveraged a lie to borrow from the devil. He's in deep, Robert, Frank said, pointing to a photo of Gallo, a large man with cold, dead eyes. He owes Gallo a fortune, and the payment is due next week. That's why he was so desperate for your money. That's why he panicked. When you cut him off, he wasn't trying to fund a development. He was trying to save his own skin. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about fraud. This was about life and death. And my daughter was caught in the middle, married to a man who had a target on his back, sleeping next to a man who was marked for death. I felt a surge of panic, a cold, paralyzing fear that gripped my heart. I had to protect Emily. I had to get her out of there. Away from David, away from the danger. Now, I considered going to the police, reporting the fraud, the threats, the connection to Gallo. I knew Detective Miller in financial crimes. A good kid. Sharp, ambitious. He would listen, but I knew how the system worked. It would take time, weeks, months, to build a case, to get warrants, time we didn't have. Gallo didn't wait for warrants. He didn't wait for trials. He acted swiftly and brutally. And if David was arrested, Gallo might go after Emily to recover his losses, to send a message. She was the wife, the asset. She was vulnerable, exposed. I was trapped, paralyzed by the realization of the danger I had inadvertently put her in. By funding David, I had fueled the fire that was now threatening to consume my daughter. I had funded the very weapon that was now aimed at her head. I had to handle this delicately, strategically. I had to neutralize the threat before I could expose the fraud. I had to dismantle the bomb before it exploded. I had to think like a detective, not a father, and I had to do it alone. I increased the surveillance on David. I needed to know what he was planning, how desperate he was, how close Gallo was to making his move. I needed to see the fear in his eyes. I observed him meeting with Gallo's enforcers. Two large men, built like refrigerators, dressed in tracksuits. The meeting took place in a parking garage. Brief, tense. David looked terrified, his arrogance gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. He was sweating, pleading, begging. They were threatening, towering over him. One of them poked him hard in the chest. David stumbled back. The enforcers were calm, cold, unimpressed. They just listened and then walked away, leaving David alone, trembling. The wolves were closing in. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The clock was ticking. The fuse was lit. The explosion was coming. I had to confront him. I had to force his hand, before Gallo forced it. I had to corner the rat before he dragged everyone down with him. I called David, my voice cold and steady. "We need to talk," I said, "about the waterfront development, and about your silent partners." Vince Gallo, he hesitated, a sharp intake of breath. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear him breathing. Short, shallow breaths. The mention of Gallo's name must have scared him more than I did, because he agreed, too quickly. "Fine," he whispered. "Your house. 1 hour." He arrived an hour later. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, dark circles under them, his hands shaking. The facade of the successful businessman was gone. In its place was a desperate, cornered animal. Ready, back. Lash out. What do you want, Robert? He snarled, pacing my living room, trying to look intimidating, failing miserably. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I could smell the fear on him. I want the truth, David, I said calmly. I sat in my armchair, watching him pace. I want my money back, and I want you out of my daughter's life. I told you the investment is sound, he lied, his voice cracking. It just needs more time. The market is... You pulled the plug too soon. You ruined everything. He was still trying to blame me. The audacity of this man. The waterfront development is a scam, I said, my voice flat, cutting him off. You sold the same property to multiple investors. You're running a Ponzi scheme. Your empire is built on lies. And you're broke. He froze. His eyes wide with shock. He didn't expect me to know. He underestimated the old cop. He thought I was just an old, clueless loser. You don't know what you're talking about, he sputtered. But his voice betrayed him. I know everything, David, I said, leaning forward. I know about the debt, the stalled permits, the recycled returns. I know about Mrs. Petrov. I know about the diamond necklace you bought for your mistress, Maria Sanchez. I tossed the photos on the coffee table. The photos of him and Maria. He looked at the photos. His face turned ashen. He stumbled back, collapsing onto the sofa. He realized I had him. The evidence, the motive, the means. He realized it was over. How? He whispered, his voice hoarse, choked with fear. I'm a detective, David, I said, my voice cold as ice. I investigate things. It's what I do. It's who I am. While you were busy playing Monopoly with other people's money, I was busy uncovering the truth. Something you forgot when you decided to steal from me. He became desperate. The arrogance melted away, replaced by pathetic pleading, begging. Robert, you have to help me, he cried, tears streaming down his face. These people, Gallo, they're going to kill me. He's a monster. I saw what they did to the last guy who didn't pay. They broke every bone in his body. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. I just need a little more money. One last payment. To get them off my back. I swear I'll pay you back. Everything, with interest. He was pathetic. A coward hiding behind a mask of arrogance. No more money, David, I said, standing up. It's over. You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it. You dug this hole. Now you have to climb out of it. And then his demeanor shifted. Suddenly, terrifyingly, the pleading turned to threats. The desperation turned to malice. The cornered animal lashed out. He stood up, his eyes blazing with a sudden, terrifying rage. He realized I wasn't going to save him. He realized he was going down. You think you can ruin me? He shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet house. If I go down, I'm taking Emily with me. I swear to God I'll destroy her. I'll tell the police she was in on it, that she knew about the fraud, that she helped me cook the books. He pointed a trembling finger at me. She signed the documents, Robert, the loan applications, the investment agreements. She's complicit. She's an accomplice. She'll go to prison with me. The threat hit me hard, a sucker punch to the gut, a low blow. He was willing to destroy his own wife, my daughter, to save himself. He was willing to use Emily as a shield. I had underestimated his cruelty, his desperation, his depravity. I saw him for what he truly was, a monster. I had to protect her, but how? How could I expose the fraud without implicating Emily, without sending my own daughter to prison? I realized I needed leverage, something that would force him to cooperate, to protect Emily, to take the fall alone. I needed to turn his fear against him. I looked at him, this pathetic, broken man, and I saw his weakness, his fear of Gallo. I walked towards him, slowly, deliberately. My voice dropped to a low, dangerous register I hadn't used in years. If you mention Emily's name, I said, stopping inches from his face, invading his space, if you drag her into this mess you created, I will make sure Vince Gallo finds out exactly where you are. Right now, I pulled out my phone. I will give him the evidence of your fraud, proving that you never intended to pay him back. That you scammed him just like you scammed everyone else. That you lied to him too. The terror in his eyes returned. Raw, primal. He knew I meant it. He knew I was capable of it. He knew Gallo's reputation. He knew that prison was better than facing Gallo's wrath. You wouldn't, he whispered. Try me, I said, my finger hovering over the call button. I had him trapped, cornered, defeated, checkmate. But I still needed to protect Emily from the fallout, the emotional trauma, the realization of her husband's betrayal. I needed her to see the truth, to understand the danger she was in. I needed her to see the monster she married. Not from me, from him. I called Emily, asked her to come to my house. Immediately. I didn't tell her David was there. I needed the element of surprise. I needed her to see him like this. Broken, defeated, exposed. She arrived 20 minutes later, worried, confused, stressed. Dad, what's going on? Is everything okay? She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw David, sitting on the sofa, his face buried in his hands. David, what are you doing here? Are you okay? What happened? She rushed to his side. Tell her, David, I said quietly, my voice firm. Tell her the truth. Tell her about the lies, the fraud, the danger you put her in. All of it. He hesitated. Looked for an escape route, a way out. There was none. I was blocking the door. He was trapped by his own lies, by his own greed. He started talking, slowly, at first. His voice choked with shame and fear. Then the words came in a torrent, a confession, the Ponzi scheme, the debt, Vince Gallo, the threats, the manipulation, the betrayal. He even confessed about Maria Sanchez, the affair, the diamond necklace. Emily listened silently, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror. She looked at David, really looked at him. For the first time in years, the mask was off, the illusion shattered, and she saw him for what he was, a fraud, a liar, a coward, a monster. Our life, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, trembling. The house, the cars, the vacations, it was all a lie. Everything, all built on stolen money. The realization was crushing her. Her perfect world was crumbling around her. I did it for us, Emily, David pleaded, reaching for her hand. The classic immaculator's defense. The pathetic excuse of a desperate man. The same hand that wore the expensive ring he bought with stolen money. She recoiled as if burned. Her eyes flashed with anger. You did it for yourself, she said, her voice trembling with rage. You put my life in danger. You were willing to let me go to prison to save yourself. You betrayed me. You betrayed my father. You destroyed everything. The anger was good. It meant she was fighting back. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a terrible conflict. Fear, anger, despair, confusion, the realization of the danger she was in finally hitting home. Dad, what are we going to do? She whispered. These people, Gallo, they're going to come after us. They're going to kill him. We have to help him. We have to pay them to make this go away. The fear in her voice was palpable. She was willing to sacrifice everything to protect herself, even if it meant protecting the man who had betrayed her, the man who had destroyed her life. She was still trapped in the hostage situation. The Stockholm Syndrome was strong. I had to make her understand that paying the loan shark was not the solution. It would only enable David. It would only postpone the inevitable. And it would never end. Gallo would keep coming back for more. No, Emily, I said gently, putting my hand on her shoulder. We are not paying them. We are not running. We are going to the police. We are going to end this. Now, she hesitated, terrified. The fear of Gallo, the fear of the unknown, the fear of losing everything, the prospect of facing the consequences, the scandal, the shame. But then she looked at David, at the pathetic broken man on the sofa, the man she thought she loved, and her resolve hardened. The strength I knew she had, the strength she inherited from Sarah. It surfaced. She saw the truth, and the truth set her free. Okay, Dad, she whispered, her voice firm, a single tear rolling down her cheek. Let's end this. The decision was made, but the final confrontation was yet to come. The storm was about to break. We had to face the devil himself. We needed a plan, a way to neutralize Gallo, expose David's fraud, and protect Emily from the fallout, legally and physically. We needed strike fast and hard. I called Frank. We mobilized our contacts. We reached out to the DA's office, to the Financial Crimes Unit, to Detective Miller. We needed help. Professional help. We presented Miller with the evidence we had gathered. The paper trail, the surveillance photos, the testimony of Mrs. Petrov, the confession we recorded from David. The case was solid, airtight, a slam dunk. The DA agreed to offer David a deal, full cooperation, restitution of the stolen funds, and testimony against Vince Gallo, in exchange for a reduced sentence, and immunity and witness protection for Emily. It was a generous offer, but it required David to face the monster he had created. David, terrified of Gallo and facing decades in prison, agreed instantly. He had no choice. He was a drowning man clutching at a lifeline, even if that lifeline was held by the man he had called a loser. He signed the papers. The sting operation was set up for the next day. David arranged a meeting with Gallo, promising a partial payment, a gesture of good faith. He would wear a wire. It was a dangerous game, a high-stakes poker match with lives on the line. It was the longest day of my life. I waited with Emily at a secure location, a safe house provided by the DA's office. We monitored the operation through the police radio. The silence was deafening. The tension was unbearable. Every crackle of the radio, every snippet of conversation, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My heart pounded in my chest. I was back in the game, but this time my daughter's life was at stake. Emily was a wreck. She was pacing the room, crying, second-guessing our decision. "What if something goes wrong, Dad?" she whispered, her eyes filled with terror, twisting her hands nervously. "What if they hurt him? Despite everything he did, I don't want him dead. I don't want his blood on my hands." She still had compassion, even for the man who had destroyed her. My own heart was pounding with fear. I had put my son-in-law in the line of fire, wearing a wire, facing a notorious killer. If he died, it would be on me. The guilt was immense, the responsibility heavy. But I knew this was the only way to ensure their safety, to achieve justice, to end the nightmare. I held her hand, trying to comfort her, trying to reassure her, even as my own doubts threatened to overwhelm me. "He's going to be okay, sweetheart," I whispered, hoping I was right. "Miller's team is in position. They won't let anything happen to him." I prayed I was right. The meeting was taking place in an abandoned warehouse. Isolated. Controllable. We listened as David met with Gallo, his voice trembling, but he stuck to the script. Admitting the debt, promising the payment, incriminating Gallo in the extortion scheme. The waiting was torture. The silence stretched. The radio was quiet. Too quiet. Then the moment we were waiting for, the signal. "The payment is here," David said. The warehouse exploded in activity. Police sirens blaring, officers shouting, the sound of chaos erupting through the radio. A brief struggle, and then silence. Finally, the words we were waiting for came through the radio. Clear, calm, professional. "Suspects in custody. Operation secure. No casualties. Gallo is down." It was over. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Emily collapsed in my arms, sobbing with relief. The nightmare was finally over. The climax wasn't a dramatic showdown. No guns blazing. No high-speed chase. It was a quiet, methodical execution of a well-planned operation, just like the ones Frank and I used to run, the way real police work is done. Vince Gallo and his enforcers were arrested. David was taken into custody. The fraud was exposed. The monster was caged. The aftermath was messy and painful. The news of David's Ponzi scheme and his involvement with Gallo became a major scandal. The media frenzy was intense. The vultures descended. They camped outside our house, outside the courthouse. Emily's face was splashed across the newspapers. The betrayed wife, the innocent victim. Emily filed for divorce. It was a humiliating process, untangling her life from David's lies. The lawyers, the courts, the public scrutiny. The assets were frozen. Seized by the authorities, they lost everything. The house, the cars, the designer clothes, the illusion of the perfect life. It all vanished overnight, evaporated. Like smoke, everything was gone, except her dignity. I supported her, of course, every step of the way. I helped her navigate the legal maze, the financial fallout, the emotional trauma. I was her rock, her anchor, just like Sarah was mine. She moved back in with me. The house was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of her pain, the late-night tears, the moments of despair, but also with the nascent hope of healing, the promise of a new beginning. We were two broken souls trying to put the pieces back together. It was hard for her, going from a life of luxury and privilege to facing the harsh reality of her situation. She was heartbroken, ashamed, and terrified of the future. But she was strong, stronger than she knew. But slowly, day by day, she started to heal, to rebuild her life. She needed a purpose, a sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to a man, or a lifestyle, or money. She needed to find herself again. She decided to go back to school. She enrolled in a criminal justice program. She wanted to become a lawyer, to help victims of fraud, to fight for justice. She wanted to make a difference. The irony was not lost on me. I watched her study, late into the night, her face illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen. I saw the determination in her eyes, the fire that I thought had died out, the strength she never knew she had. She was Sarah's daughter, after all, and mine. She was a fighter. A year passed. The dust settled. The scandal faded from the headlines. The wounds started to scar over. The pain started to fade. David was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He never apologized, never showed any remorse. Vince Gallo got 25 years. His reign of terror was over. The victims of the Ponzi scheme, including myself and Mrs. Petrov, managed to recover some of the stolen funds. Pennies on the dollar, but the damage was done. Lives were ruined. Trust was broken. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. Emily was thriving. She was at the top of her class. She was volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping people who had lost everything, people like us. She had found her calling. She had found her strength, finding redemption in service. One evening we were having dinner at my house, just the two of us, simple food, pasta with Sarah's favorite sauce. The aroma filled the kitchen, a comforting reminder of the past, of happier times. The house felt like a home again. We were talking about her studies, about her plans for the future, about a difficult case she was working on. She looked at me, a genuine smile on her face. The first real smile I had seen in years, a smile that reached her eyes, free from the shadow of David's influence. "You know, Dad," she said, her voice soft with reflection. "I'm really happy. I'm glad, sweetheart," I said, my heart swelling with pride. "You deserve it. I thought I had everything with David," she continued, looking down at her plate. "The money, the status, the excitement, but it was all a facade. It was exhausting. Always living in fear. Always wondering when the other shoe would drop. Always pretending to be someone I wasn't." She paused, looking up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The memory is still painful. "This life, this work, it's real. It's honest. And it's because of you. You saved me, from him, and from myself." Tears welled up in her eyes, tears of gratitude, of regret. She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Dad, for everything. For laughing that night at the dinner. For not seeing the truth. For not believing you. For betraying you." "It's okay, Emily," I said, squeezing her hand. "I love you. That's what fathers do. We protect our children, even when they don't want to be protected. Even when they fight us every step of the way." I looked at her, my daughter, strong, independent, and finally understanding the value of integrity, of honesty, of true justice. The values Sarah and I had tried to instill in her. She was the best part of me. I thought back to that night. The dinner, the insult. David had called me a loser. I smiled to myself. I had lost a significant amount of money. My life savings. The illusion of a happy family. The peace of my retirement. But I had won something much more valuable. I had saved my daughter. I had reclaimed my self-respect. I had honored Sarah's memory. I had upheld the law. I had proven that justice always prevails. I was just an old retired cop, living on a pension, in a quiet house filled with memories. But as I sat there with my daughter, watching her laugh, a sound so pure and genuine, so free from the weight of deceit and fear, I knew I was the richest man in the world. The loser had secured the real win, the only win that truly mattered. Thanks for listening. Please rate our story in the comments. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe.